Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. It is awesome to be with you guys this evening live. Haven't done a lot of live streams lately, so it is a little bit daunting. Also expecting some load shedding, so pray that Eskom decides to spare us tonight from load shedding. It's a very exciting topic for me this evening. That we're going to be speaking about what does it take to be a man. And I have my good friend Sheldon Kidwell, who's the pastor of Bay City Church. He's going to be joining me in a minute. He's here already. He's just waiting in the green room, having refreshments, digital, online refreshments. So he's going to be joining us in a minute to speak about this topic. I'm very excited about this very important topic. And I want to do a little bit of an intro. So I want to just say as well, if you are watching live, you're welcome to share something in the chat. Just say hi. It's great to see you there and engage with us, even if you have questions. I don't know if we're going to get to questions. Tonight's really just an intro. It's the beginning of something, and we're going to see what's going to build out of these sessions, speaking around what does it mean to be a man? What does it take to be a man? So I want to just give a little bit of an intro and sketch a bit of a scene for this topic and why we are speaking about this and why I believe this is really important. So if you clicked on this video from the link, the thumbnail, you would have noticed I used a little bit of clickbait there with the image of a gentleman by the name of Andrew Tate. So if you are under the age of 30, you know who Andrew Tate is. If you're over 30, you probably don't. If you're between 30 and 40, you may or may not know. I think Sheldon knows. I think we've had this conversation. So there's some of you may know and some of you don't know. It's not really important who he is. You can go and Google him. But I just thought it's a great springboard to speak about this topic of what does it take to be a man? Because what I've noticed in the discourse and the conversations that's happening online, on social media, the things that I often get in my social media feeds around masculinity, around this conversation, someone like Andrew Tate is someone that jumps out. And at one point he became quite viral very quickly because of his very strong views, some very controversial views. And that was really interesting. And I remember at Christmas time, I asked all of my nephews and nieces if they know Andrew Tate, and they all knew about him, and they all had an opinion about him, and I've asked all the adults, and none of them had heard of Andrew Tate. And I thought that was interesting because what it's showing me is that there's a vacuum, there's a space in which young people, young men in particular, but young people are looking for voices that are going to speak into this thing of identity. What is the identity of a man? What does it mean to be a man? How do you become a man? What are the signs that you are a man? Is it that you're really strong and powerful and you're a fighter and you have a lot of money and you have a lot of girls on your arm? And are these the things that mean that you've made it? Is this the signs that you have to look for? And who are the ones you're looking to for advice on how to get there? What's the journey? What's the path to obtaining this? And can it even be obtained? And so in that conversation, I realized that there's a real emptiness for a lot of young men and even older men. I mean, just the other day, bumped into a gentleman who has a heart for men's ministry, and he was just pouring out his heart to me, and he was saying to me, he's realizing that men his age, and he's probably in his 50s, 60s, men living in isolation, men are living on their own. They are trying to just make sense of life on their own. They don't have other close men that they can talk to. If a crisis hits, there's no one that they can phone. There's no one that they can turn to. And he's experiencing this as he's ministering and journeying with men. And it just again made me realize what an important topic this is of speaking about what does it take to be a man? What does it mean to be a man? How do we find this identity? And how do we help young men find this identity in a world where there's so many different things that are being thrown at men and so many different conversations that are being had? Just for example, I was just looking at the whole conversation around toxic masculinity. And it's a real thing. There are real parts of the world that are affected by men treating women and children badly, as an example. That's a real thing. But that's a criminal element in society that needs to be dealt with. But instead of dealing with the criminal element, what we've now done is we've created a stigma. We've framed masculinity as toxic, and more things are being shoved into that basket of saying, no, that's toxic, and you need to unlearn being a man. And so young men don't know, what is expected of me? What does society want me to do? Do they want me to be strong and powerful so I can fight for women and children and protect them, or must I just be sort of cowardice and weak, because if I'm too strong, then that's toxic. And so men don't even know where to go, where to turn. And so in that space, I understand that there are people like an Andrew Tate, and there are many other voices like that online who draw attention, who immediately capture their audience because they're saying something that men are desperate to hear. They're saying something that that no one else is saying, and they're willing to speak out about things that men are saying, yes, that's great. Someone's speaking out about that. Someone's speaking into that topic. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that per se. But it shows that there's a lack of good, true role models and a standard. What is the standard that's being set? What does it mean to be a man? That's the advice that come from guys like that, and there are many others, but it's advice about, lift weights, be strong, be a fighter, make a lot of money, hustle, don't take any nonsense from anybody. It's this kind of how they see women. They sort of see women very much as a second-class citizen. So all of this advice is there, but does that really mean you're a man? Is that really what it means? And so I've been thinking about that a lot, and that's why I've brought a friend who I've journeyed with, Sheldon, along onto this conversation to speak about this. And because I think we need to have these conversations, because I see the men around me that have had a profound impact on my life. I see men who have found a settledness in their identity as a man, as a husband, as a father, in their role in the community. I see them, and I see what it is that has settled them in their position and in their calling and in their identity. And it's not any of the stuff that you're hearing online. It's not any of the things. Those things, lifting weights, it's great, guys. Lift weights. It's great to work hard. There's a great thing. Shitting mode. Okay. It went very dark there. I knew that was going to happen, but I wasn't quite 100% prepared for that. I want to just make sure Sheldon's still with me here, as we have transitioned now into the world of load shedding. And so I just want to make sure that I've got him there. I'm going to carry on with this conversation, and I want to, I just want to make sure everything's, there we go. Yeah, he's still there. Everything's still going. I think we're surviving. I hope the stream is still up. I think it is. If you're on the stream, just give a thumbs up there. I'm just going to make sure I got access to all of these different things, because now I was sort of hoping and praying that load shedding wouldn't happen, but it's happened. And so I just need to get myself ready for that. Okay, so into this conversation, I want to bring Sheldon in. This is hopefully going to be a series. I don't think it's going to be a once-off thing. I really believe this is a conversation that I want to hear what you guys also think, hear what your thoughts are, and bring your opinions, bring your voices into this. And so I wanted to begin just by sharing a scripture that really spoke to me. And this is around Jesus and his ministry. And what I found so profound about his ministry is the fact that Jesus didn't actually need other men in a certain sense. In a sense, he really did, because he needed those men and those women as well. He needed them to go and become disciples and to go and take this message further. But he didn't need them for himself. But yet he drew a group of men around him. He drew around him a band of brothers. He drew around him his disciples. And within that band, there was an inner circle. And you see this. It's quite appropriate to read this today, because we are celebrating Easter this weekend. And so it says in this passage in Mark chapter 14, verse 32, then they came to the place which was named Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. And he took Peter, James, and John, that was his inner circle, with him, and he began to be troubled and deeply distressed. And he said to them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch. So in this moment of greatest need, he draws on these men who had walked a road with him, and he calls them into this moment with him to go and pray, to go and seek the Father, to go and seek the Lord together. And he went a little farther and fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will. Then he came and found them sleeping, and said to Peter, Simon, you are sleeping. Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak. Again he went away and prayed and spoke the same words. And when he returned, he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. Then he came a third time and said to them, Are you still sleeping and resting? It is enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed. And so they go to the betrayer. What a incredibly sobering moment to see these men who had journeyed together, who had formed this relationship, this bond, and they are too weak to stand with Jesus in that moment. They fail in being there for him, but yet he is there for them in that moment. He sets an example to them. He demonstrates something, and in their weakness, he is strong. And there's something of that coming together, of men standing together with each other in their moments of weakness. And Jesus is demonstrating, he's modeling something of the power of these relationships, the power of being joined together with each other, with other men. And so if I look at the extremes in society, I see one extreme is that men isolate. We just isolate. We don't want anything to do with anybody. We'll just make our own way. We've been hurt. We've been disappointed by father figures, by figures of authority, and so we just isolate. And the other extreme is that men look for validation by and large in society. So we look for success as a sign of validation. We look for the big group to tell us that we've made it, we validated. And even something like initiation in many cultures, that is a validation from the culture. But this is not the validation that was existing here in the relationship between Jesus and his disciples. This was an intimate relationship between men that gave them the sense of their calling, their purpose, and their identity. And it's interesting that just a little bit before this, and I'm not going to read from Mark, but I'm going to read from the book of Luke, we find this occasion where just a few moments earlier, Jesus says these words to Simon. The Lord said to Simon, Simon, indeed Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail, and when you have returned to me, strengthen your brothers. So what is happening here is Jesus had already prayed for Peter. He already knew what was coming. He already saw the weakness. How did he know that? It's the Spirit revealing it, but it's in relationship. And he prays before that temptation even comes. And he knows that it's going to come. And he knows Peter is going to betray him. And Jesus hasn't taken offense to that because it's not personal. He understands it in the context of Peter's weakness, his own weakness still as a man. There's a certain part of Peter's character as a man that hasn't shaped and formed yet. But through this, it's going to form. And so he says to him, when you have returned, when you've gone through this, and when you've come out the other side, use that experience to strengthen your brothers. Lift up your brothers. Lift up this band of brothers and empower them with what you now have. And that can only happen in the context of relationship. That can only happen where men come together in real and genuine relationship, in small groups, in other formats where we come together and we share our lives with one another in a genuine way, to be able to have this kind of impartation. And I really sense that in the midst of what's happening in the world, in the midst of the confusion, in the midst of all the pain, that God is calling men towards this kind of relationship that Jesus modeled. And so it's with great honor to welcome Sheldon into the conversation. Oh gosh, I'm just realizing, Sheldon, for some reason my picture of you has just gone really big. There we go. Are you there? Can you hear me?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I'm just going to correct. I think with load shedding, it's just thrown out your image. There we go. I don't want to destroy your image. It's very important.
That is important. Have I got a big head on your screen, maybe?
You do, but it's appropriate. It's all the knowledge. It's all the wisdom that you're going to share with us tonight. This is why we're here. We're here to glean from you, Sheldon. And so you are bigger than me in the picture, but you are also bigger than me in real life. So I suppose it's appropriate. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for joining us in this conversation, because I think this is such a important conversation. And even as we were praying beforehand, I just felt God's Spirit just on this in terms of speaking into men's hearts and speaking to what's happening in the world at the moment. So I wanted to ask you just off the bat, maybe just some preliminary thoughts. I don't know. I've got some questions, but I don't know if there's some things you want to share just straight off in terms
Yeah.
of this whole
Yeah.
topic.
Well, firstly, thanks. I mean, it's the joy of doing this is that we actually do see each other in the flesh and are good friends and are standing, believing, and fighting for things in our communities and our city. And this conversation about being a man, what is a man, what makes you a man, are crucial things in our society today because our children grow up with the narrative of the culture, which is so loud,
Yeah.
and we're trying to establish the culture of the kingdom, that our little sons grow up with an assurance in their hearts and their minds, and according to a narrative, according to the word of God, according to church and the community what God has set up, because the cultural voice is very loud. So this conversation, these topics, we have to have them. We have to keep talking about it, and can't be silent in this. So yeah, it's fantastic to talk this through, and we're not going to do it all tonight, guaranteed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Sheldon. I think that's one of the things I've always picked up in your heart, and just seen what you've modeled and what you've modeled not just in Bay as a church, but in your relationships is relationship with one another, the strength of building in and through relationship, and not through function, not through what you can get. I think as men, that's often, what's the first thing we ask each other is, what do you do? So there's always a very functional connection.
Yeah.
But in your opinion, like in your experience as you've pastored Bay and as you've worked with men in different contexts, what are you seeing? What are some of the biggest struggles that men are facing right now in this moment, in this season that we are living in?
Yeah, and I think that whole term, toxic masculinity, it puts a pressure on men to not be men, because now we are scared of the opposition that would come
Yeah,
up from that. And I think it's so important to define masculinity. And I always, come back to that question of myself growing up, as an older guy, asking, when did I become a man?
yeah,
When did that happen to me? I was literally this afternoon, my daughter was out with a friend of hers, and her dad came to pick her up. And we were just talking about stuff, and we were talking about the army, and whether I got my papers, and I went and did my service, and it was the year actually that I got my papers but didn't have to go and do the service. And then his words to me about one of his nephews was, he was Korean and he needed to go back to Korea, and he says, and he came back and he was a man. I was like, yeah, that's very interesting. Oh, that's true. So what
yeah,
made him the man? Was it, camaraderie with other men? And actually, I think there was something in that, of the band of brothers that creates, of sticking together. But if we look at us, society, and the examples that you're asking me there, if I just take a few highlights of guys that are in my world and my community, there's one guy who's had a hit out on his life, because in the industry and that what he works on and works in is that he's standing for truth and integrity, and
sure,
people in his game don't like that. And so it's a pretty broad industry and stuff, but there's a hit down on his life, need to go into hiding for a couple of months.
sure,
So these are the hassles of facing, of doing things with integrity. You've got, men who have a lack of belief and a lack of understanding and in their identity and who they are. I see this all around. So you've got this buy into addiction, and
yeah,
it leads to destruction of their lives, and they just seemingly can't break free from it. You've got guys that are employed, and the company has a very strong female character that's leading, or it's their boss, and so she uses manipulation to try and force them, and so they are very difficult to stand up and actually encounter and stand against and oppose manipulation. These are the struggles that men are dealing with. I've seen men in our community who are struggling to provide for their families,
yeah,
but the world measures them as failures, and you've not cracked it in this society at all. But actually in a community where they're a part of, they know they're loved, they're not measured by according to their lifestyle and their standards. So those are just a few highlights that come up for me
yeah,
if I think about the struggles that men are having. And these are real things, and they're not trying to hit it out the park. They're just trying to do what they need to do in society, and the opposition they get and the things that come up against them. I'm standing with wanting to provide, wanting to do their work properly, and all those things. So those are just some examples.
yeah. It's such good examples, Sheldon, because I think it just shows you the breadth of stuff that men are dealing with on a daily basis, and often in the midst of just the normal, ordinary struggles that they have to, like you say, provide for their family, just to be a good husband, to protect. I mean, in our society, just to think about protecting your family, and all of these sorts of things that men are on their minds. And then on top of that, you get these pressures being put on by society that are just unrealistic ideas that are being placed on men. And I was reading through some of the stuff around toxic masculinity, and it was just fascinating to me on one of these medical websites. It wasn't a medical website even. And they were saying, we need to re-educate basically men in society and re-educate parents, and we need to use marketing campaigns. And I'm like, and some of the stuff that they're speaking about is violence, for example. It's really just criminality. It's men who are, they're saying men who are harming women and children. And I just think, well, if you make men in society strong, if you empower strong men to be who they are called to be, those men who are doing those things won't have the space to be doing them. But actually what's happening is that men are being disempowered. And so more and more there's space for these criminal elements to flourish, to do what they want to do, because more and more the ability for men to stand up and actually bring order to society is being removed from them. And so any element that wants to has room to just do whatever they want.
And
so
that causes men to back off rather than stand up.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for you, Sheldon, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, and you just I think you alluded to it in your earlier comments. For you, what were the things that you could say were the defining moments for you in your life, the moments and the relationships and the things that gave you a sense of identity and a sense of validation around being a man and being able to do what you're called to do and being able to be a good husband and a good father? What are some of those things for you?
I think it's easy to answer it in explaining and the journey that you go on, and because I do ask that question, and I've asked myself, when did I become a man? Was it when I started smelling and realizing that things were changing in my body? I'm now entering to manhood. It's because you start shaving, or there's other things. Is it because of sexual encounters? Is it because of drinking and partying? Is it because of money and earning? All those things. What defines it? When does that moment, and I think, the Jewish culture is a good example there. When a young boy turns 13 or 14, he basically takes on doing his father's business, and so he's entering into manhood, and what we've lacked in our society is some sort of ritual that kind of helps us flow from being a boy to a man. We have nothing in our society. I have nothing that I can reflect back upon my life and say, I know that at this point now, I know with my 11-year-old boy, I've got to help him now in 2-3 years' time, starting to have conversations to help him that he's now entering into manhood and what that looks like. And it's voices into your life that help you, shape and form that. But if I reflect on my life, now I'm in my, later in my 40s, through my 20s, you're still figuring it out. You don't know. You don't fully understand. You're still carving your path in life. And then through different things I've done over the years, different people that I've read and stuff, there's a lot of talk into that. You genuinely actually probably into your 30s start understanding your purpose as a man on this life. Now, because of our society, we're in such a hurry to get things done quickly. We've got a lot of, in our society today, a lot of particularly sports people that are very young and achieving incredible things. It doesn't mean that they've entered into manhood because of their success. The defining of your manhood is not around what you're doing. It's around understanding your part you play in society and the part you have in bringing things across with the understanding of us being believers, strong character that forms and shapes the things in your heart and life to essentially serve others. So if I look at my life, I don't know. I was a very timid teenager, very unsure of myself, and didn't really know at which point I'd become a man. I was always thought of myself as a small, joke and saying I'm big, but honestly, I grew up with an understanding that I'm small. And if I walked into a room of men, I would think I'm the smallest and the least. But actually now I'm a fairly large stature guy. But the mindset took me years to be able to shift and understand what truly a man is. And in understanding that masculinity is not something you gain. It's not something you find. Masculinity is actually bestowed. It's actually
Yeah.
passed on to you. And that's where the roles of our fathers play a key thing. But this is also the key part of a community that speak into you. So if I'm look at my life, many men disappointed me. They let me
Mm.
down because they were my leaders. They were helping me. But then they did stuff. And you're like, really? Like, what a bad example. And you just saw this happen over and over again. And you kind of learn the responsibility you have as a fatherly person to bestow to other men the treasure of masculinity. And we can go in another conversation and define masculinity and what that is. But it's been a journey. It hasn't been,
Sure.
oh, wake up today, I'm a man. It's
Yeah.
an understanding of my position, my identity, and all those things that form and shape around my character and all that kind of thing. And it's been a journey in my
Sure.
life. It's been beautiful.
Yeah. I love what you're saying about it being bestowed, because I think that is, I think where I see this discrepancy between, like I'm saying, the hyper isolatory sort of approach where men, and I think it's often out of hurt, it's often out of a lack of a role model or a father figure, or men who have hurt them, or men that you look to and you were hoping that they would bestow something, you would hoping there would be something, and then there's just nothing. And so then out of that, it's almost like, well, I'll do it my way. I'll do it on my own. I'll prove them, and men become very isolated. And it was interesting chatting to this gentleman that we were seeing a lot of older men who were just completely isolated. They had no one that they could turn to if the rubber really hit the road. And then there's the other extreme where men try and get that, try and get it bestowed on them from society by and large. Like you look at some of the initiation ceremonies that happen even in some cultures, and that in itself also doesn't actually convey that meaning, because it's only in a relationship where there's some level of intimacy and trust. There's some level of a security where you can actually have from a man to another man. And if I look at my own life, I mean, I've spoken about this a lot on this channel, but and you're part of that group now. But I mean, that little pastors group which we're part of, that started many years ago. And when I joined that, I was a young pastor of 23, 24 years old, leading a church on my own. And and even then, I didn't really know whether I was, can I really do this? You kind of just going on blind faith. You kind of just going, well, God's told me, and you do it. But you still have so many insecurities. And it was that little group of men, many of them were older than me as well, had a few years more maturity and experience. It was in that group that I found that beginning to be bestowed, beginning to be earned in a sense, not earned, but a recognition of, this is who you are, this is your identity, and you can be comfortable in that, and you don't have to try and prove yourself, and you don't have to second guess yourself all the time. And so many men are in that space where they're trying to prove themselves, or they're second guessing everything they're doing because they're not sure, is this really who I am? And so those relationships, I think, are key. I don't know if you've seen that for yourself in terms of the relationships that God has put in your life.
Without a doubt, you see, because it's never done in isolation. So like now this weekend, we're looking at the cross and Jesus and what he's done for us. Who was the one on the team of the 12 that isolated themselves and allowed, different voices and thoughts and wanted to go his way. And in isolation, he ended up hanging himself because he had to go and do what he had to go and do, but his own turmoil in his heart as a man, that he betrayed the Son of Man. And he suddenly realized what he had done, So the biggest part of the journey of masculinity being bestowed is not trying to be someone else, is that you be true to yourself. I had to learn who I am. I had to understand who I'm made in a way. I've got certain ways and that things roll and thinking and how things play out, but find that security. When I found that security of being me and being happy in this body and the way I am, that starts forming and shaping. And without a doubt, it's been men. And yes, I have the joy and the privilege of having a father that has, been a close, loving father to me, but the voice of your father is crucial, that speaks those words of validation as a young boy, that speaks those things into your heart. But every man grows up with that wound, grows up with that brokenness, grows up with that longing, that crying out, and it's formed and given from other men, like you say, journeying in that place of that community, and it shapes and leads you and guides you when you're open to it. I found why that worked for me, because why I've journeyed with men in our community now for years and years and years, It's that pursuit of godliness. It's the pursuit of purity. It's the pursuit of certain things in your own world. You're doing that, but doing it together as a collective is the powerful thing that feeds you, but also then grows and matures you as you journey together. And I think if you and I are both honest, we've seen many men fall by the wayside. If we've journeyed on for years and years, there's many guys that aren't continuing the journey, because they've isolated themselves.
Yeah.
So it's the power of other men's voices that you can trust. And I think that's the next part I think that it builds into, is that men do struggle to trust. And it takes a long time to build that heart-to-heart connection where you truly can trust someone who will speak straight to you without being offended, but they will speak straight and know that it's out of love that they're saying these words. And many men back off and but don't tell me what to do, and then we've lost, because the trust factor is a crucial thing in this
absolutely.
journey.
Yeah, that scripture that I read of Peter and Jesus, that interaction, I think is such a beautiful interaction, because Jesus knows Peter's weakness. Jesus knows where Peter's going to fail. And Jesus prays into that weakness. Jesus doesn't condemn him for it. I mean, it's a pretty serious weakness to completely deny your friend, your close friend of 3 years. It's a pretty serious weakness. And Jesus doesn't even bat an eye. It doesn't faze him, because he's already prayed for his friend. And he says, when you have turned, strengthen your brothers. And so for me, I think exactly like you're saying, where I've found that close knitting of other men, other relationships with men, one of the things I found so valuable is slowly, and like you say, it takes a while to learn this, is to slowly realize that they're not looking there, if they're godly men, who are settled in their own identity, and they're not looking to one up you, they're not looking to trip you up or to see you fail. They are truly interested in your best interests. So when you learn that over time, when you slowly begin to build that trust, you realize, I can be real, I can be vulnerable, because my failure, like Peter's failure, they're not going to say to me, that's it, you failed, you're disqualified, you're out of here, that was it. They're actually going to say, let's pray for you, let's stand with you. And in fact, if they're really godly men, they probably would have said, we've already prayed for you, we actually saw this coming, and we already prayed for you. And to have men like that you journey with. And so I think, I mean, I don't want us to talk too long on this, because I want us to pick this up and keep having a conversation over the next few weeks. Some final thoughts from you, Sheldon. What would your advice be for a young man watching this, a young man who's maybe been bombarded on social media with Andrew Tate telling him what he needs to do to be a man, and on this side it's this person telling him what he needs to do, and maybe in the church context he's finding it's a little bit weak, there isn't stuff around masculinity, and he's looking for answers. He's not finding it in his home, he's not finding it in his workplace or in his social circles. What would be your advice for a young man like that?
You see, when you speak about Peter and how Jesus dealt with Peter and didn't judge him in it, the same thing happened when they were sitting in their Passover meal, and Jesus said, the one with whom I hand this bread to is the one who's going to betray me. That offering of the passing of the food culturally was still an invitation for friendship and intimacy. And Judas still squandered it and said, and he walked away and he left the room straight away, because even at that point of betrayal, Jesus was still offering him friendship and saying, yes, it needed to be done. But and I know now this might sound super cliched and sound ridiculously spiritual, but to any young person, the model and there's only one perfect model we have is in the life and of Jesus Christ, our Savior, who became man for us. And when you truly get to know Jesus, now you see, you might be in a church context that doesn't deal and talk with these stuff. You can still find who Jesus is. And in your journey with him, that's where your security comes from. There are umpteen examples of his model of true manhood in the Bible and how he dealt with others who were wronging him and others who were growing. And that would be a first and foremost, because if we're going to grow as men, you don't grow as a man and just put muscle on and have no character and just look good. Then you're not getting it. Like we say about a woman, beauty is from within. A woman, her beauty starts within her, not on external kind of stuff. It's the same with a man. Your masculinity starts from within. and it's the internal journey that actually brings out the strength of the man that stands up to things. And
Yeah.
that would be my first and foremost. But also ask the Lord to connect you with other men who will journey with you. And we've found that in a church community, that's where the strength lies. You see, you've got many offers in the world of places to go and have and community, from clubs to sports clubs to online things, all sorts of places. But it's the centrality of knowing and understanding Christ in you and living from that understanding. Masculinity and the being a man is something from within that comes forth, that then others benefit, a community benefits from you. So I wouldn't, as a young person, always look about trying to get something, but actually, what are you offering? And what are you giving into the context of a community? And that's how you would grow. And it might sound a cliched answer, but I've seen that operate and work in many in my life and in your life and in many lives. So we'll leave it at that. And that's what I'll say there.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Sheldon. I agree with that. I think there are so many distractions. That are coming towards men and even towards women. There might be some women watching this and they want to know what to look out for in a man and how do they know the character of a man. And there is that saying, that I think is it a Greek saying, Greek philosopher, I forget his name, but he said, you'll know a man by the company that he keeps, or something to that effect. And there's a reality in that, because though that company shapes you, it shapes you. And so my advice to young men would be, find a band of brothers that are truly pursuing Christ. They are looking to follow Christ, and join yourself with them, journey with them, grow and learn to trust them, and find older men as well who you can relate to in that way, in a real way, and build relationship. And so I really believe that's something that's huge on God's heart at the moment, in terms of how do we rebuild society according to the kingdom of God and according to God's principles. It's going to begin with the men. It's going to begin with godly men being raised up. And it begins at the very base of our character, like you said. It begins at the foundation of our relationships and our character. So I want to, there's so many other things I want to ask right now, but I want us to keep to sort of 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and we're going to pick this up maybe next week, or we don't know, maybe the week after. And keep having these conversations. So I want to invite any of you who have been watching this, please join the conversation. If you want to post something in the chat below this video, if you're not watching live, you can post it on the comments. We'll try and read those comments. We'll try and answer questions. If there's questions, we'll try and do that when we do this again. I'm not going to make a promise as to when it's going to be, but we will be doing this again. And we will try and pick up on those things and try and engage with those things. And see what we can say that can add courage to you. So, any final thoughts from you, Sheldon, as we sign off tonight?
Yeah, I think the bottom line that comes from a man is his character, and the character that forms and shapes, that is nurtured in someone's life. And if you define what character is being tested. It's approved. There's proof. There's worth. It's the one the translation says it's the specimen of tried worth. True character means you've been tested, you've been through fire, but you're still standing, and that's the true test of men. Throwing at you, no matter what the struggles you're facing, true character always pulls you through, no matter what the circumstance is. So that's what community forms and shapes, is your character. And when you run away from it, you are the one that lose out. That's why we stick together. That's why we have a band of brothers, because we form and shape character. So I'm very happy to continue and do more of this conversation, Martin. It's a crucial one.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Sheldon, thank you for giving the time. Thank you for being here, offering your voice, also being vulnerable. I think that's part of what we want to do, is be real about ourselves. And so I appreciate that, and appreciate the value that you've added to my life. So it's great to be able to chat with guys who that there's a journey and there's a relationship that's really shaped and imparted into me. So I appreciate you for that. Thank you, everybody who's watched and commented and participated in this. We will see you guys again soon, and have an awesome Easter. Go and celebrate Easter in your local churches. Go and worship Jesus. Go and just go and focus your attention on him. He is really, as Sheldon said, he is the example for us that we need to follow. So let's go and do that. Bless you guys. Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you, everybody. Good night.